Welcome everybody to this Citizens Assemblies talk. This is the introduction to the third demand. What is a Citizens Assembly? Hosted by your friendly Citizens Assembly working group. I'll hand over to Kathy, who's going to start the presentation, and I'm going to manage the slides, or try to anyway. Kathy?
Yes. Hi, I'm Kathy, and I've been with Extinction Rebellion for over 4 years now, and I'm the external coordinator of the Citizens Assembly Working Group. Welcome, and thanks for being here. And our aim, Citizens Assembly Working Group, we call ourselves CAWG for short. Our aim is to spread the word amongst all people in XR and beyond, to the public as well, as to why a UK-wide Citizens Assembly is vital if we're going to ensure finding fair solutions to the climate and ecological emergency that we're all facing. And this talk is designed to give you the information to enable you to start up conversations about citizens' assemblies and help other people fall in love with what we like to call real, authentic democracy. So we'd love you to feel comfortable to go out there and help spread the word. In the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about citizens' assemblies with Marine. Halfway through, we always feel that two voices are far more interesting than one. What they are, how they work, and why Extinction Rebellion is demanding one. And then after that, we'll open up for questions. So I'd just like to begin by recapping Extinction Rebellion's 3 demands, which have recently been updated. And the first is tell the truth. I always like to add a little word here because the government have very seriously failed at telling the truth. They signed up in 1992 at the Rio Climate Convention. They signed a binding commitment to keep the population, the people, that they had a right to know about the climate crisis and its effects. And they failed. Very few people are really sufficiently aware of where we are and the implications for the future. So they haven't told the truth. Second demand is act now, and the third one is decide together. And it's this third demand that we're going to focus on because at the heart of it is a call for a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. We like to stress that Extinction Rebellion is not trying to exert its will on anyone or claim that we have all the answers. We just want the UK public to have a say on how the UK responds to this crisis. We also believe that if we achieve the third demand, that the first and the second will fall into place. The truth will be told and the government will have to act. So what is a citizens' assembly? They're a key mechanism of what is technically known, it's quite a mouthful, as deliberative or participatory democracy. But as I said, it's what we call real democracy. And what that means in practice, we're going to have a little look now. So you may recognise the picture on the left. It was taken in the House of Commons during a net zero carbon emission debate. And no, it looked like they were socially distancing, but they weren't. This was pre-COVID and only 40 MPs out of 650 showed up. What's more, this was the first climate debate that had taken place in over 2 years. And on top of it, it was the year that we had that record-breaking February temperatures in 2019. And the turnout just indicates either, a lack of awareness or concern. And that in itself was very concerning. The other thing to note about this photograph is how the two sides, they're facing each other, they're in opposition. One side is seeking to win over score points on the other. And that is, in fact, a key factor in their inability to tackle this climate and ecological crisis because there's no dialogue across the aisles. The picture on the right is an image of what we could have. a citizens' assembly, where you can see all sorts of people come together and they're there to find solutions. And you can notice how they're working in groups. It's very much a collaborative, not an oppositional approach. So the current system has proved it cannot deal with the emergency. And let's have a little look at why. We'll just go over that. So standard election cycles run every 5 years. I think it's 4 years in some countries. And that's when we, as voters, we hand over our power by electing one person to represent us on a range of very different issues on which they are generally not experts. In the UK, on top of it, the voting system is first past the post. There's not even proportional representation. So the political landscape is dominated by just 2 parties, and many people are, in fact, so disillusioned that they don't even bother to vote. Short-term decision-making. We've known about this crisis, now an emergency, for over 40 years. But as most politicians only actually see as far as their next election campaign, they don't really want to do anything about that because it might affect their re-election. It's not truly representative. The moral majority of politicians are from similar privileged backgrounds, and it is often in their interest to maintain things as they are. They have to align with their party, and they're actually told mostly how to vote. And their party also often falls in line with vested interests. So in actual fact, there's a whole other influence that is undemocratic that is happening through the back door. And it's no secret that many politicians are influenced by their funders, and this is often in conflict, which is what is best for most of us. The result is that issues as far-reaching and complex as the climate and ecological emergency cannot be resolved by a system where there is limited opportunity for radical ideas. In short, our current political system does not support politicians to make those difficult decisions that need to be made. And importantly, nor does it allow citizens a say in what type of future they want. So this is the parliamentary system that we have, but the one that we need is a citizens' assembly, which has very good problem-solving capabilities. So how does it work? Well, before I go through that, there are 2 requirements that need to be in place prior to the commencement of a citizens' assembly. One is a viable question that needs to be formed that allows for real decision making by the assembly members, or that the assembly itself must have the power to frame the question. At the start, it must be clear what the government will do with the assembly's recommendations, a public commitment to responding to or acting on the recommendations. Now let's have a little look at how it works. There are sort of 6 main steps, and the first one is sortition. And this is a process whereby members of the assembly are selected randomly, similar to UK jury service. Its aim is to create a diverse group of citizens, which broadly mirrors the age, gender, geographical location, ethnicity, and class characteristics of the population as a whole. So everyday people from different walks of life that broadly represent the community. So it would be a mix of bakers, doctors, students, accountants, shop assistants, transport workers, and more. I'm sure you get the idea. It works something along these lines. Letters are sent out to thousands of people across the UK, inviting them to indicate their willingness to be part of an assembly. And if you choose to accept the invitation, your name goes into a hat for a second round. The positive responses are stratified. They're sorted into categories, as mentioned before, like age and class. And it's from these category groups that the second random selection takes place. And these are the people invited to take part. I think it's really important for us to note, to assure people that Assembly members actually do receive remuneration and all expenses are covered: travel, food, childcare, caring needs. And that is really to ensure that people from all backgrounds, not just the comfortable, feel able and supported to take part. The next step is learning. They receive training in critical thinking and hidden bias. They then hear from a range of speakers, which includes experts, scientists, economists, historians, stakeholders, power companies, activists, environmental organizations, and rights holders such as farmers, young people, and people already affected. Members of the Assembly can ask questions, have things explained, and have facts checked. There's an oversight body that ensures that the presentations are fair, they're wide-ranging and balanced, and that presenters with particular interests are clearly identified. So somebody from the fossil fuel industry is clearly going to have a fossil fuel bias, while at the same time arguing for jobs or whatever it is that they might put forward in their presentation. The next step is submissions from the public. And so actually it's really a mechanism by which the broader public can feed in on topics or issues that they'd like the Assembly to consider. And there's a mechanism in place whereby the issues and suggestions are collated and then presented to the Assembly for consideration. Step 4 is deliberation, and this is where quite a lot of the magic actually takes place. In small groups of about 8 to maximum 12 people, they discuss what they've heard, how it impacts them, their community, the wider population. They listen to each other, then deliberate together, which is a process of talking, exploring their feelings and understanding other people have different views, needs or opinions. And they go on to find common ground in the best interests of everyone. Each group has a trained facilitator who makes sure everyone's voice is heard and no one person dominates the discussion. They then go on to draft and vote on recommendations. The Assembly produces a report which includes the reasons for backing the recommendations it makes. It shows the reasons why decisions were made, as well as a summary of the different views on the subject. And step 6, the government responds to and implements the recommendations. That's the hope. So, is XR setting a precedent by calling a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological emergency? Not at all. We've only got to look across the Irish Sea for an example of how citizens' assemblies are being used to enhance the democratic process. And we often use this as it's quite a well-known example, particularly successful example. The Irish Assembly was established by the Irish Parliament. 99 citizens were selected to participate, and they actually deliberated on 5 issues over the course of 1.5 years. That isn't the usual way that it happens. Usually one citizens' assembly would consider one issue. But they did this, and I think they learnt from their experience. The 2 most notable were gay marriage and abortion. And on abortion in particular, the Assembly broke political deadlock that had been present for years, and helping to inform the public debate and the framing of the question that was put to a referendum in order to change. They had to have a referendum in order to change the constitution in which abortion was illegal. Interestingly, on the abortion issue, 64% of the Assembly members agreed on the recommendations put to the Irish government. That's in the Citizens' Assembly, and in the referendum itself that followed, 66% of the electorate voted in favour of the constitutional change. So this actually is a really good indication that the Assembly was actually a pretty accurate reflection of the country as a whole. We always like to have a little quote from people who take part, of which there are many to choose from, because it is quite has an impact on people who take part. And this is a quote from Noreen O'Flynn, and she was quite a young member, very young member of the Irish Citizens' Assembly. And she says, it's not just a particular type of people who've gone to college and they've studied something and they're all making views on it. You get to hear what the ordinary people, the people that it affects on the ground, how they feel about something, what they would like to change about it, and then go about it in a political manner after gaining all the information. So this notion that we all have that MPs are more, well, not all of us, but a lot of people have, that MPs are more informed than the average person is not true. In some instances, they may be, but generally they're presented with briefing notes shortly before a vote. So members of a Citizens' Assembly will arguably have much more time than the average politician to gain knowledge, question experts, deliberate, and collaborate with fellow citizens. So Ireland is not the only country where this is happening. There are real democracy processes happening all over the world at a local, regional, and national level. Not all of them, though, are necessarily citizens' assemblies. And if you'd like to explore more case studies, you can visit participedia.net, which is a great resource, or you can come to one of our other talks, which is Around the World in 8 CAs. Anyway, now we'd like to play a clip to give you a flavour of what can be achieved when people come together like this. It was filmed at an event called America in One Room. It isn't a citizens' assembly, but a deliberative poll, but it really gives you a wonderful insight into the power of discussion and collective intelligence. So over to Marine.
Yeah, I'm going to play it now, but give me a wave or a shout if you can't hear it. Here we go.
In the heart of Texas.
Last table on your left, they will check you in. A little bit more serious. That's beautiful. Yeah, there, that's great.
526 Americans gathering.
I love this. Great. Thank you so much.
Upset about the partisan divide.
Let's be real.
This is an experiment, a scientific sample. Democrat, Republican, and Independent, representing 47 states.
You are going to listen to other people whom you never ordinarily would encounter.
Reflecting who votes on election day.
Hey, how are you?
It's a 4-day in-person poll called America in One Room. Before arriving, this group took one poll on the major issues in the 2020 election. Here,
it's a great question.
They listened to candidates, to experts.
This is really your time to have your voice heard.
And break into randomly selected small groups to talk.
When's the last time you talked to a 70-year-old white Republican?
I don't think I've ever talked to a 70-year-old white Republican until now.
You know, we're being stormed at the southern border, and that's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
The illegal immigrants that we have today, you can see it all of the time, waving their country's flags, burning the American flag.
Sure, on TV you see the ones that do all this crazy stuff, but most of them work.
Like the country, this group is deeply divided about immigration.
I feel like you should have a border wall. And then along comes ICE, deports them. How can we continue to do that? In America, we don't want to learn your language. We don't want to follow your customs. We follow our own customs. And to me, it looks like they don't want to become Americans.
You know, Gary, your family were illegal immigrants. The American Indians, this was their country. Yeah. All of us came here, and we didn't learn their language. We didn't learn their customs. We said, you take ours and you take it now. So we're all children of illegal immigrants. I don't know how we can be so choosy about the new ones.
That got to be a little heated in there.
It definitely did. But we've all respected one another and got to hear each other's opinions. And I never thought I would be able to relate to someone that was a Republican. And I have, more than once.
More than once.
Right.
I think it's been interesting to talk to Trump supporters because I don't meet many.
Seeing all of these people from all of these other walks of life, exactly how my views have changed on it, I'm not so hardcore.
What is your advice about political discourse in this country?
You need to listen, not yell, not scream. You need to talk.
At the end,
And this is how your voice will be heard.
a closing poll to see if there's been any movement on the issues, but already visible.
Like, it's opened my mind to see that I need to listen to other people's views.
Is the recognition that there is unexpected power
I really enjoyed you.
in bridging the divide.
I have enjoyed this beyond measure.
Aww. Yeah, so that was America in One Room. As Kathy explained, that wasn't necessarily a citizens' assembly, but it just shows you the magic that happens when you put people together who come from very different backgrounds and who, as the interviewees in the clip say, if you listen to each other, which is what citizens' assemblies at the core are all about. So let's go back to the presentation here. So just a super quick recap of what we think is so great about citizens' assemblies and why we think we need at least one, if not several, to deal with the climate and ecological emergency. It's because they can think long term rather than political cycles or electoral cycles. They break political deadlock, as we could see with the abortion issue and the same-sex marriage issue in Ireland, for example. It is fair, real representation of society, so not just people who went to university and who have political careers, but anyone could potentially be elected, really. It's transparent, so in the report, you see exactly why decisions were made a certain way, and it also reports on people who didn't agree with the decisions and if there was disagreement within the group. And all the presentations that the assembly get are available online to watch as well for the general public. So there's no behind closed doors, secretive meetings taking place, decisions being made about our lives that we have no idea about. And what's so important as well is that these are informed discussions. So everyone in the assembly gets the information. This isn't based on information that people have already from their own bubbles, but it's information that comes from experts, as Kathy explained, and rights holders and things. And it's listening to each other, deliberating together, collaborating, and coming to recommendations together. And the collective intelligence. This isn't just about one person or a small group of people. This is about collectively thinking about these issues and coming to solutions together. So we get a lot of people ask us, in my local council has declared a climate emergency and now we want them to do a citizens' assembly, or at our university we want to do a citizens' assembly. And as Kathy mentioned before, we need political discourse and we need deliberative democracy on all levels. We need it on a regional level, on a local level, but also on a UK-wide level. And as XR-UK, we are really focusing on this UK-wide citizens' assembly because we need that holistic kind of national UK-wide approach to come to solutions on this major issue. So first of all, we need coordinated urgent government action. If we go around having loads of separate council or borough citizens' assemblies, it wouldn't be coordinated action. And of course, this affects the entire country, indeed the entire world. So it needs to be coordinated throughout the entire UK. We need everyone in the same room for UK-wide policy changes. So we need people from different governmental departments, from different NGOs, from civil society, from all different groups to come together to make these policies. And so local deliberative processes are amazing for certain things. You know, should we have a really busy ring road running through a protected forested area in Norfolk, for example? Should we have HS2 running through this protected ancient woodland in the Midlands? You know, those kind of deliberative processes on those kind of topics would be really amazing. And again, we do need those also, but we are talking right now about UK-wide policy. And of course, one of the most important things is as well that when we're talking about the international arena, and this is a global crisis, the UK government is the one that goes to these meetings, to these talks. You know, it's the UK government that represents us in the international negotiations. So we can change as much as we want on the local level, but it's not our local councillors who go to the UN to have these negotiations. So that's why it's really important that we need to tackle UK-wide policy as well. So there is some confusion as well about Climate Assembly UK, which was a citizens' assembly that took place a few years ago, that was commissioned by 6 select parliamentary committees. So these are committees that have a sort of advisory role, an investigative role within different government departments. So they decided, yes, we're going to have a citizens' assembly. And the question was, how can the UK reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050? So there were some really great things about this particular citizens' assembly. The recommendations that came out of the report that from the deliberations of the assembly were really great. For example, the citizens agreed that they needed much better climate information and leadership from the government, which actually sounds remarkably like our demands, which is tell the truth, so more climate information to the general public, and act now, i.e. leadership and real action. So we could definitely agree with them on that. They also agreed that fairness is important. Again, within XR, we really stress the need for justice and a fair transition. And the assembly members, on their own accord, came up with this issue of fairness, that they wanted the changes to be fair for people. Other interesting things that they said is they had some presentations about things like carbon capture, for example. And they really didn't like that because they didn't see how that was going to be scalable in the near future for as soon as we need it, i.e. right now. And they also didn't like the lack of focus that that would bring on protecting current wildlife, current biodiversity. So they said absolutely no to reliance on future technology. And what obviously for us was amazing is that they said there needed to be a follow-up citizens' assembly. So they really liked the citizens' assembly process. They really trusted that process. So these were all things that we were extremely excited about, and it was a very well-run, robust process that they had. Unfortunately, from the get-go, there were some severe limitations to this citizens' assembly, which means that we couldn't consider it as Extinction Rebellion's third demand being met. First of all, of course, the date, which is the government's target, 2050, we know that that's way too late. That is not acting according to the climate science as it stands today. So we said this needs to be negotiable, and the citizens need to be told that this target is inadequate, and that wasn't an option for the Assembly. They wanted to just go by the government target. So we couldn't support it for that reason. Other limitations were that the remit was very limited. So, for example, they didn't consider emissions from freight and shipping, import, and also they didn't consider the emissions of products and produce that we consume here in the UK, but are grown or produced in other countries. So the emissions are happening in other countries, but they're still due to our lifestyles here in the UK, and they weren't included in the discussions. There was way too little publicity. No one really knew that this was going on unless you were, you know, Citizens Assembly nerds like we are, or you happen to be interested in climate change or that sort of thing. You had to be really from quite a niche audience to know that this was happening. And of course, then as a result, you don't have any public buy-in, and it's very easy for the government to ignore the recommendations, which they did. Also, this was an advisory Citizens Assembly, and it was very much set out to be an advisory assembly. It was never designed to have its recommendations taken on, or there was never any upfront commitment from the government before it started. So these are all limitations that we've learned from a lot, and these are all things that we think should be in place going forward. So what would a Citizens Assembly on climate and ecological justice look like for it to be up to the standards that Extinction Rebellion would like to see in an ideal world? So it would be run by independent organizations, which is what Climate Assembly did do. And then we would have several Citizens Assemblies starting at the same time on different themes. So we would think that the big group of people would come together first, and they would get all the basic training together. So as Kathy said, on unidentified bias or subconscious bias, on climate change and environmental things, ecology, but also history, social justice issues, economics, all these basic things they would get together, and then they would split up into separate topics. So that could be divided up by region or by things like agriculture, health, education, finance, things like that. It would kind of depend on the organization running it. We would expect that each sub-assembly, so to speak, would be at least 100 members each, because 100 members is really the minimum where you can have that nice mirror image of the UK as a whole. Any less than that, and you lose that proportional representative sample. And of course, justice must be central to all decisions. So we cannot have solutions that work great for some people, maybe people in London, but are a disaster for people up north, or solutions that are great for us here in the UK, but are actually really bad for people in the global south, for example. So that must be considered at all times. We would like to see a minimum of 6 weekends. That's really the minimum for all the training, all the information, all the deliberation that the citizens need to do. And people often ask us, well, this is going to take forever. We haven't got time for this, but it's actually a relatively quick process. And we really believe that if the government were to commission a Citizens Assembly on climate and ecological justice tomorrow, we would actually already see the recommendations within the next 9 months or so. So actually, for a huge amount of policy work that needs to be made for recommendations, that's actually not that long. And just to reiterate, XR is not there to design or to run the Citizens Assembly. That's not our job. That's not our expertise. We are an activist group. We're very good at blocking roads and chaining ourselves to stuff, but we are not the group that would organize it. It would be an independent organization with all the expertise and experience in running deliberative processes like a Citizens Assembly, and they would be the ones running it. And it is, of course, absolutely essential that the assembly is independent, because we don't want the public to feel like, oh, but this is a, you know, XR assembly, or this is completely run by fossil fuel companies, or anything like that. It has to be independent for it to be truly robust and fair, and for it to get public buy-in. So there is this climate and ecology bill that's going on at the moment. It's a private members bill, and that is one practical way that we can start pushing for citizens' assemblies, as well as, of course, non-violent direct action by groups like Extinction Rebellion. But the climate and ecological bill basically wants the UK to make and enact a serious plan, and they want to do this by commissioning a citizens' assembly. And this would include our entire carbon footprint, and also the protection and conservation of nature, which at the moment is seen as two separate things. Of course, climate change and ecological breakdown are very much part of the same thing. So you'll see here, you can look it up. It's called 0 Hour, this campaign, and you can see whether your MP has already signed up to it or not. And if not, then you can write to them and ask them to sign up to this bill. So I'm not sure, I don't think we need to talk about this right now, unless there are questions about this later. But within Extinction Rebellion, we use the term citizens' assemblies, which we've just been talking to you about for the last half hour. But there's also people's assemblies, which we use a lot within the movement. If anyone wants to discuss that further, feel free to bring it up in the questions. Are there any questions? You can get in touch with us as well on these links that you can see here, and I'll pop all of this in the chat as well, so you can copy and paste it from there. But I think we'll stop talking now